we're awaiting the result of that vote in Parliament where rebel MPs were trying to seize control from the government, from Prime Minister Boris Johnson, of the agenda, and they have succeeded. The rebels have succeeded and defeated the government, 328 votes to 301, so a majority of 27. Quite a few of Prime Minister Boris Johnson's own Conservative MPs must have voted against him for that to take place. What does this mean now for Brexit? It means that tomorrow there'll now be a vote aimed at tying Prime Minister Boris Johnson's hands to take no deal off the table because he has lost tonight's vote. It's highly likely tomorrow's vote will go very similarly to today's, that the same rebels would once again vote against Boris Johnson and his hands would be tied to prevent no deal. He's speaking at the moment and he's likely outlining the fact that he expects to fire those Tory rebels from his party, and this all increases the likelihood of the country heading towards a general election in the coming weeks, because the government has just lost a very significant vote and the first big defeat of the relatively new Prime Minister Boris Johnson. I don't know if we can check in on the British pound, which earlier in today's session fell below the 120 handle. It's well above that today. It recovered intra-session and hasn't moved much on this vote. This vote was kind of expected, though a bigger defeat than perhaps Prime Minister Boris Johnson was expecting, certainly a bigger defeat than he wanted to see. Melissa?
So, Wilfred, when you say further elections down, I mean, if the vote tomorrow basically ties Boris Johnson's hands further, that means that he is in jeopardy?
No, it doesn't mean he's in jeopardy immediately. Kind of conversely, because his hands have been tied, he is expected to personally seek an election so that he could get a fresh mandate and perhaps a majority to untie his hands, as it were, himself. It's not a foregone conclusion, though, that election would be granted. To get an election that he seeks himself, he requires a two-thirds majority, a big hurdle, of course, whilst Parliament's so divided, though it is expected that if he tabled it, those who have been calling for change would be kind of inclined to vote for an election. Having said they want change, they could hardly say, oh, but we don't now want an election. That said, the first step tomorrow is the actual vote on whether or not no deal will be taken off the table. Right. The expectation is the same rebels that voted against the government today would vote against them tomorrow. So that's largely sort of expected to be a foregone conclusion tomorrow. And then the next thing to focus on is, does the Prime Minister seek and get granted a general election or not?
Got it. Okay, Wilfred, thank you. Wilfred Frost with the latest developments on Brexit. So if a hard Brexit or a no-deal Brexit is off the table, well, it should be very interesting ECB meeting next week.
Right. I mean, but is any of this, again, there's no real... The bad stories outweigh the good stories right now, in my opinion. Again, the market's hanging in there, and that's the ultimate judge and jury. The fact that we're within 3% of an all-time high, people say, well, it's sort of shed all these negative news. It's looked past it. The market must be fundamentally strong. And it's hard to argue against that. But again, with all these headlines out there, at a certain point, it matters. And again, I will say, and Karen made the point, the VIX at 20 is too low. The VIX, in my opinion, will print 30, and when it does, that should be the culmination of a sell for this market.
I just think, though, that in the micro of this moment, what the pound means to me is the pound is a risk currency. So seeing the pound break through 119 was a very bad risk moment overnight. It coincided with, you can argue who's the tail, who's the dog. But I want to see the pound, if I'm looking to take on risk, I want to see the pound back over 121.